The alley, still dark, darker than it had any right to be, this close to dawn. The forensic tent was gone now, but the police tape remained, sagging at one end under the combined weight of rain and a case that no one in an official capacity was in any hurry to solve. Someone was already there. A figure at the far end of the alley in the pre-dawn shadows, across the street from its entrance, watching, and watching the way only someone who has done it before knows how to watch. Dark coat, collar up, completely still, the particular stillness that takes patience to learn. A light came on in a window across the street. The figure didn't move. Rain began. The figure didn't move. A cat crossed the alley floor without hurrying. The figure watched it go the way you watch something when you have nothing else to look at and nowhere else you'd rather be. Then, footsteps. From the left, unhurried. The particular tap of a cane on wet stone that by now you would recognize anywhere. The figure heard it, turned toward the sound, and left, quickly but quietly, gone well before the footsteps had any chance to round the corner. Percy entered the alley, stopped at its mouth, looked down its length, looked at the street where, a moment ago, someone had been standing. There was nothing there now, no one, but he held his position at the alley's entrance for 3 full seconds before he let himself step forward, which, for Percy, was as close to surprise as his face was ever likely to show.
Let's not rush. Mysteries hate being hurried.
The Blackwood Alley Case, Episode 2, The Pattern. The study had changed since yesterday. The chessboard was gone entirely, cleared away, stored somewhere it would not be needed again for a while. In its place, the desk had become something else, a caseboard. 3 photographs pinned to the wall above it now. An empty alley, a coffee receipt sealed in an evidence bag, a careful sketch of the symbol Percy had found carved into the brick. Percy stood at the window, in the same position he'd stood in yesterday, but something behind his eyes was carrying more weight than it had been then. He was holding the leather notebook, open to the page where he'd written a single word the night before.
The first thing a detective learns, the thing they don't teach you, the thing you learn by getting it wrong, is the difference between a case and a pattern.
He closed the notebook, set it down beside a cup of tea that, like yesterday's, would go untouched.
A case is one event. A pattern is a case that has been happening for a long time. Quietly, carefully, patiently, while everyone else was looking at something else.
He picked up the sketch of the symbol and studied it. The way you study something you already suspect is more important than you first believed.
Clara Marsh was not the beginning. She was just the first person careless enough to leave a phone recording.
Only the rain answered him.
Which means there were others. Which means there is a pattern. And patterns, always, go back further than you expect.
Percy put on his coat, picked up his cane. It tapped once against the floor. Slow, certain, the sound of a man who already knew exactly where he needed to go next. A functional room, filing cabinets in long grey rows. A desk sergeant glanced up once as Percy entered, decided there was nothing here worth his attention, and returned to his newspaper. Percy moved through the police archive with the particular confidence of a man who knows exactly what he's looking for and has simply never been told he isn't allowed to look for it.
Three disappearances spread across 2 years, the most recent of them 7 years old now, all within half a mile of Blackwood Alley, all officially closed. Runaway, relocation, insufficient evidence. The particular bureaucratic language of cases nobody wanted to spend money on.
He pulled a file, opened it. His expression gave away nothing at all, but the cane tapped once against the floor, just once, the way it did whenever something underneath his stillness had actually moved.
James Alderton, 58, accountant, disappeared on a Thursday in November. His employer said he'd been behaving strangely in the weeks before, distracted, secretive, asking questions about the building's old foundations.
A second file.
Miriam Osei, 28, graduate researcher, disappeared on a Tuesday in March. Her university noted she had requested access to historical records about Victorian underground infrastructure in the city. The request was pending when she vanished.
A third.
Thomas Hare, 61, retired civil servant, disappeared on a Sunday in August. He had spent 3 weeks at the Public Records Office requesting documents about a land reclassification in the 1880s. The documents were listed as unavailable.
Percy closed all 3 files and laid them side by side, studying them the same way he'd studied the alley itself, looking for whatever wasn't there rather than what was.
3 people, 3 different ages, 3 different professions. No obvious connection between them.
He took out his notebook and wrote a single word beneath each name. Then he circled all 3.
Except that they were all, in their different ways, trying to understand something that was underneath the city.
Percy pulled a 4th file and set it with the others. He didn't need to open it to read the name. He already knew it before his hand reached the drawer. Marsh, C.
And so was she.
The bookshop was dark, dusty, and warm. The particular warmth of a room that has been heated by the same small radiator for 40 years. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, the smell of paper, and something underneath the paper that was older than paper. Edmund Holt looked up from behind the counter as the door opened, and looked, almost immediately, as though he wished he hadn't.
Can I? We're not actually open yet, I'm afraid.
Percy entered anyway, as though the sign on the door had said otherwise. He looked around the shop with the same slow, deliberate attention he gave to everything, his eyes resting just briefly on the shelves at the back, before turning to Edmund with a warm smile that did not entirely reach his eyes.
I'm looking for a book. I understand you may have had a rather unusual one pass through recently.
I have a great many books.
This one would have been donated, anonymously, about 7 years ago. Not catalogued properly. Possibly not catalogued at all.
Edmund's hands, which had been straightening a stack of books on the counter, went completely still.
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to.
Of course not.
Percy moved deeper into the shop. Edmund watched him go with the expression of a man who couldn't decide whether to follow or flee, and was fairly certain that whichever he chose, it would be the wrong one.
People lie with their mouths, but their hands always tell the truth. Edmund Holt's hands hadn't moved in 4 seconds. For a man who fidgets, that means he is thinking very carefully about what to say next.
Percy stopped at a shelf near the back, ran one gloved finger along the spines, then, very quietly, crouched to examine the bracket beneath it. Something had been carved there, small, almost invisible unless you already knew to look. The same symbol. Percy straightened, said nothing about it.
The book was checked out 4 times in the past 7 years. All 4 people who checked it out are currently missing. I'd like to know who donated it.
I genuinely don't know. It arrived by post. No return address. There was a note that said it belonged here.
Belonged here?
That's what it said.
Percy looked at him for a long moment. Edmund held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking away, which, for a man who had spent the entire conversation looking away from everything, was its own kind of answer.
I believe you, Mr. Holt. I believe you completely. That is almost more troubling than if I didn't.
Percy arrived at an industrial car park, a security hut with a plastic chair and a thermos that had seen better decades. Ray Briggs opened the door before Percy had even reached it, which told you, before either of them said a word, that he'd been watching the approach for some time.
You're the one asking about the alley.
Word travels.
I reported it 3 months ago. My supervisor said to leave it.
Percy didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the cane, and waited. The particular patient silence of a man who has learned that some people, if you let the quiet sit long enough, will fill it correctly on their own.
3rd Tuesday of every month, always late. 11, midnight, thereabouts. Same people. Or I think it's the same people. I never saw their faces. They go in through a door at the back of the alley. I thought the door was bricked up. It isn't.
A door?
Going down. You could hear the footsteps going down. I told my supervisor. He said it was probably a private function.
A private function? In an alley? At midnight?
That's what he said.
Percy looked out at the car park, the rain. His cane tapped twice. The thinking rhythm now, not the certainty one.
Is there anything else you remember? Anything at all that seemed unusual?
Ray Briggs hesitated. Just a moment. Just long enough.
No, nothing else.
Percy studied him, nodded slowly. He had heard the hesitation clearly enough, and filed it away without remarking on it at all.
Rule 2. The most important thing in any room is always what isn't there. Ray Briggs had something else to say. He chose not to say it, which means it is either dangerous or it involves someone he wants to protect, or both. I would find out which, in time.
Late that afternoon, Percy walked down a grey London street. He turned the corner and stopped. A woman leaned against the wall opposite, dark coat, notebook already open in her hand. She had been waiting for him specifically, and she had known with some precision which direction he would come from. Percy looked at her for one moment, then walked toward her at exactly the same pace he'd been walking before he'd seen her at all.
Everyone in this city knows who you are, Inspector Wick.
Percy stopped, tilted his head, just slightly.
You have me at a disadvantage.
Vivian Cross. I'm a journalist. I've been covering disappearances in this area for 8 months.
8 months.
The police stopped finding them interesting after the second one. I didn't.
Percy looked at her notebook, at her coat, expensive enough to suggest an editor who respected her, not so expensive as to suggest she'd sold out to get there. At her shoes, practical, flat, the shoes of someone who walked a great deal. At her hands, no ring. A pen callus on the right middle finger, ink on the left index. She wrote constantly, and she wrote fast. He did all of this in roughly 3 seconds.
What do you know about the rare book?
Vivienne didn't react to the directness. She had expected it.
I know all 4 people who checked it out are gone. I know it was donated by someone using the name of a library that burned down in 1947. And I know...
She paused, deliberately, giving what came next its proper weight.
that this alley used to connect to an underground archive. Victorian construction. It was sealed in 1922 after a structural report. Officially.
And unofficially?
The sealing was paid for by a private donation. The donor's name is in no public record I've found. But the architectural firm that did the work was dissolved 3 weeks after the project completed. All their staff records gone.
Percy went very still. The cane did not tap at all.
She had been doing this for 8 months. She knew things I hadn't found yet, and she was handing them to me, which meant either she was generous, which journalists rarely are, or she wanted something in return, which journalists always do. Why are you telling me this?
Because you'll go into the archive. I can't. Not safely. Not yet.
And when I do?
I'd like to know what you find.
There was a long pause. A bus could be heard somewhere in the distance, one neither of them was waiting for.
That is a very honest answer for a journalist.
I find honesty useful when I'm trying to get something from someone who is considerably smarter than I am.
Percy almost smiled. Almost.
I'll be in touch, Miss Cross.
He walked away. She watched him go. Then she wrote something in a notebook. That evening in Percy's study, the caseboard on the wall had grown. 4 photographs now: Alderton, Osei, Hare, Marsh. A map of the streets around Blackwood Alley, one section circled in pen. A photocopy of the architectural report Vivienne had sent ahead, true to her word. Percy sat at his desk with the warm lamplight. The city beyond the window was entirely dark. Percy had borrowed the checkout log from Holt's bookshop. Edmund, after considerable persuasion, and the quiet, settled understanding that Percy was simply not going to stop asking, had finally allowed it, on the premise it would be returned. 4 names, 4 dates, all within the past 7 years. All 4 were the missing persons in his files. Then Percy turned the log over. On the back page, something that hadn't been visible from the front at all. A folded piece of paper tucked into the binding. Small, old, creased from being opened and refolded more times than anyone could easily count. Percy opened it carefully and read it. His expression did not change at all, but his hand, the one holding the page steady, went completely still.
I have 3 rules. I have spoken 2 of them. The third, never open a case you aren't prepared to finish. I did not say lightly.
The cane tapped, once, twice. A slow rhythm, different from either of the 2 he'd already shown that day.
Because there are cases you investigate, and there are cases that, once you have seen far enough into them, begin to investigate you.
He set the note down on the desk. He smoothed it flat with the palm of his hand and looked at it for a long time.
I was beginning to understand, with some certainty, and not a little discomfort, that this was the second kind.
The note read,
They know someone is looking. Stop now, or the next file will have your name on it.
Next episode, The Bookshop. Percy returns. Edmund Holt has had a visitor and they leave something behind. Will it change everything Percy thought he knew?